The morning Elias Pruitt came to the market square with his debt notice and his satisfied mouth, Honora Fairweather was already watching from the edge of the vegetable stalls, a basket on her arm and a cold feeling moving up through her ribs that had nothing to do with the October air. She had seen the folded paper in Pruitt's coat the moment he crossed the cobblestones, and she knew the shape of it. She had been managing her father's accounts long enough to recognize a legal notice by the way a man carries it, pressed against his chest like a weapon he has not yet decided when to use. Her father stood beside the apothecary's cart, speaking with old Mrs. Tanner about a liniment, entirely unaware, and Honora began moving toward him before Pruitt had even opened his mouth. She did not reach him in time. The voice that carried across the square was not loud. It did not need to be. Pruitt had chosen his moment with the patience of a man who had been waiting for it. And the market fell quiet the way a room falls quiet when someone speaks a name that should not be spoken aloud. Honora felt the silence arrive before she fully understood the words, and she pressed forward through the gathered bodies with her basket clutched against her side and the cold feeling now sitting squarely in her chest, solid and heavy as a river stone. "Dr. Fairweather," said Elias Pruitt, and his voice carried the particular pleasure of a man delivering news he has rehearsed. "I believe you are aware that the third quarter payment on the Fairweather property mortgage fell due on the 1st of this month." He unfolded the notice with a single clean motion. "As it has not been received, I am here to present formal demand, before witnesses, as the terms permit." Dr. Edmund Fairweather was 61 years old and had the kind of face that did not easily betray distress. He took the paper from Pruitt's hand with the same steady courtesy he used when delivering a difficult diagnosis. The hands did not tremble. The expression did not collapse. But Honora, who had known that face all her life, saw the slight elevation of his chin that meant he was keeping something down by force of will, and she stepped forward to stand at his left side. Pruitt did not acknowledge her. He looked through her with the ease of a man who has never found it necessary to notice furniture. "The amount outstanding," Pruitt continued, addressing the space just past her shoulder, "is £140, including the penalty clause for late tender. I trust the figure requires no repetition." A murmur moved through the assembled villagers. £140 was not a figure that required repetition. It was a figure that required sitting down. Dr. Fairweather read the notice. He folded it once, precisely, and placed it in his coat pocket. "I am aware of the amount, Mr. Pruitt," he said. "I am also aware that the penalty clause to which you refer was not among the terms I agreed to at signing. I shall need to consult the original document." "By all means," said Pruitt pleasantly. "You have 30 days. It was at this moment that Honora became aware of the man standing at the outer edge of the crowd. She could not have said precisely what drew her attention to him. He was not tall in a way that demanded notice, nor dressed with the kind of ostentation that announces wealth before a word is spoken. He wore a dark traveling coat, plain and well made, and he stood with his arms at his sides in the easy stillness of a man who is accustomed to watching situations develop without inserting himself prematurely. His face was. She registered it in fragments, the way one registers details when the mind is already occupied with something else. Angular, composed, perhaps 34 or 35, with the particular quality of attention in his eyes that belongs to men who have spent years reading rooms before they enter them. He was watching Pruitt. Then, without any visible decision having been made, he walked forward. The crowd parted for him, the way crowds part for men who move as though they expect to pass. He stopped 2 paces from Pruitt and reached into his coat. "Forgive the interruption," he said. His voice was quiet and direct, with the clipped precision of a man who has conducted enough negotiations to know that unnecessary words are a liability. "I arrived in Ashwick this morning. I happened to be passing through the square." He produced a card and held it between two fingers. "My name is Gabriel Sterling. I am prepared to settle the sum in full, today, before these witnesses, by banker's draft, if that would resolve the matter." The hush that followed was of a different quality from the one before it. It was the stillness of a room in which no one is certain what has just happened or what the correct response to it is. Pruitt looked at the card. He looked at Gabriel Sterling. He looked at the card again, and something moved behind his eyes. That was not quite surprise and not quite pleasure, and was perhaps the recognition of a complication he had not anticipated. Dr. Fairweather turned to look at Gabriel Sterling with the same considered attention he brought to every new thing placed before him. He took the card. He read it. He returned it with both hands, the gesture courteous and deliberate. "Lord Asterley," he said, "I am grateful for the offer. I am sincerely grateful. But I cannot accept it." Gabriel Sterling did not flinch. He did not argue. He waited, the card still extended, as though he was allowing the refusal to complete itself before he responded to it. "My daughter does not need a fortune, sir," Dr. Fairweather said. The words were quiet and without cruelty. They were the words of a man stating a principle he has held for a long time. She needs a man with heart, not a fortune. And I have found, in my experience, that the two rarely arrive together. I mean, no disrespect to you personally. Gabriel lowered the card. Honora had said nothing through any of this. She had stood at her father's side and kept her face composed and watched the stranger absorb the refusal, with a stillness that she found, against her will, more interesting than the refusal itself. Most men, when declined publicly, either argued or retreated with visible injury. This man did neither. He simply put the card back into his coat and nodded once, and there was something in the set of his jaw, not anger, not wounded pride, but a quality she could not immediately name, that made her look at him a moment longer than she intended. He turned, and his eyes found hers. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. No more. He did not smile, and she did not look away. And then she turned back to her father, and he turned back toward the edge of the crowd, and Pruitt was already folding his papers, and the market was beginning to breathe again. And Honora stood with her basket on her arm, and the cold feeling still in her chest, now accompanied by something else she did not have a name for, and did not immediately attempt to find one. The coach to Taunton departed at 2:30. Gabriel Sterling was not on it. Honora learned this the following morning when she looked up from the consulting room accounts and saw him through the front window, standing outside the solicitor's office across the lane. He was not looking at her. He was reading something, a document of some kind, held flat in both hands against the wind, and the expression on his face was the same focused, contained attention she had observed in the market square. Not agitation, occupation. She put down her pen and went outside. "Lord Asterley," she said. He looked up. He did not appear surprised to see her, which she found mildly irritating. "Miss Fairweather?" "The Taunton coach left yesterday afternoon," Honora said. "There's another on Thursday." "I am aware," Gabriel said. "Then I wonder," she said, keeping her voice level and pleasant, "why you are standing outside Mr. Calloway's office at 8 o'clock in the morning." He considered his answer for a moment, in a way that suggested he was choosing between several versions of it. "Because I went to the registry yesterday, and the clerk became uncomfortable when I asked to see the original Fairweather mortgage filing," he said. And in my experience, clerks do not become uncomfortable about documents unless something in those documents does not want to be seen. Honora looked at him steadily. My father told you he would not accept your money. He did, Gabriel agreed. And yet, here you are. I am not here about money, he said. I am here because the debt does not look right to me. And I have spent 15 years learning to recognize the difference between a debt that is real and a debt that has been constructed. That is a different kind of skill from having money, Miss Fairweather. It is, in fact, the skill your father described as lacking. She did not reply immediately, which was itself a kind of reply. I am not asking your father to accept anything, Gabriel continued. I am asking a solicitor and a registry clerk questions that any person with legal standing could ask. If what I find is nothing, I will take Thursday's coach and you will never see me again. If what I find is something, you will want to know about it, regardless of what you decide to do with the information. Honora looked across the lane at the solicitor's door, then back at him. And what do you want in return? He said it without hesitation. Nothing. She studied his face for a long moment, looking for the thing behind the word that people usually put there. She did not find it, which made her more cautious, not less. My father will not change his position, she said. I know, said Gabriel. He looked back down at the document in his hands. I am not doing it for your father. He said it without emphasis, without any particular weight, as though it were simply an accurate statement of fact. Honora stood in the lane with the morning wind moving past her, and found she had no answer for it, not a refusal, not an acceptance, not anything that adequately addressed what he had just said. She turned and went back inside, and she did not look through the window again for the rest of the morning, which required considerably more effort than it should have. 3 days after that conversation, Honora sat across from Gabriel Sterling at the parlor table with her father's account book spread between them and the gray afternoon light coming through the window at a flat, unhelpful angle, and told herself that she was doing this because the discrepancy he had identified in the mortgage interest calculations was real, and she could not explain it without a second set of eyes. That was entirely true. It was not entirely the whole truth. Gabriel had the manner of a man who worked, not the manner of a man who performed working. He read ledger entries with the same quiet attention he gave everything else, and when he found something that did not accord with the surrounding figures, he placed his finger on it and said so plainly, without the slight inflation of importance that men sometimes brought to the act of knowing things women did not. Honora had expected to find this condescending. She found it, instead, unexpectedly easy to work alongside. This entry, she said, turning the register to face him and pointing to a line in the third quarter column. The interest figure is calculated at 4.5%, but the original mortgage terms specified 4%. I assumed it was my error. It is not your error, Gabriel said. He leaned forward, and their hands reached for the same ledger page at the same moment. Her fingers on the left edge, his on the right, and then his hand closing briefly over hers on the spine of the register as he steadied the book against the table's edge. Neither of them moved. The afternoon was very quiet. The fire in the grate made its small domestic sounds. Outside, a cart moved past on the lane. Honora drew her hand back and resumed reading aloud. The discrepancy appears in each of the last 6 quarters, she said, keeping her voice even, which would account for a significant portion of the shortfall Pruitt is claiming. Yes, Gabriel said. He was writing something down, and he did not look up. It would. And if the interest rate was altered without your father's knowledge at some point after the original signing, That is not a discrepancy. That is something else. The rain began without warning, the way autumn rain in the West Country often does. Not a gradual darkening, but a sudden decision by the sky to commit fully. By the time they had locked the account books away, and Honora had retrieved her coat from the hook by the door, the lane outside was running with water and the gutters were overwhelmed. She stepped outside and pulled her coat up against the rain, which was immediate and cold and entirely indifferent to her schedule. Gabriel appeared at her side, and without asking, without the slight hesitation of a man calculating whether the gesture would be welcome, he removed his coat and placed it over her shoulders. It was warm from him. It smelled of traveling wool and something faintly resinous, like the inside of a ship's hold. Honora pulled it closer without thinking, and then was immediately aware that she had pulled it closer without thinking, and that 3 people on the opposite side of the lane had seen her do it. She wore it the full length of the street, aware of every window, every doorway, every pair of eyes that tracked the village doctor's daughter walking through the rain under a baronet's coat. She was aware of Gabriel walking beside her, his shirt already darkening with rain across the shoulders, apparently unconcerned. She was aware that the coat was too large for her and that she had not offered to return it. She was aware, most of all, that none of this was uncomplicated, and that she had passed the point at which she could pretend it was. Pruitt came to the consulting room on a Thursday, which was her father's longest day. He arrived at 4 o'clock, when the waiting room was still half full, and he handed the revised notice to Honora in the doorway, because her father was with a patient and she was the one who answered the door. She read it standing on the threshold with the afternoon light behind her, and Pruitt's face arranged in the expression of a man who finds administrative necessity genuinely regrettable. The accelerated repayment clause was on the 2nd page. Honora read it twice, then read the surrounding paragraphs. The language of the clause did not match the language of the document around it. It was not a dramatic difference, not the kind of thing that announced itself. But she had been reading legal and commercial documents alongside her father's accounts for 6 years, and she knew the way a document's voice stayed consistent with itself from beginning to end, the way a person's handwriting stays consistent across a letter. This clause was written by a different hand. Not literally, the ink and the script were the same. But the construction of the sentences, the specific legal terminology, the rhythm of the phrasing, it belonged to a different document. 3 weeks, she said. The clause is quite clear, Pruitt said. The clause, Honora said, does not read like the rest of this mortgage. I would be happy to arrange for Mr. Calloway to review it with you, Pruitt said, and his voice contained the particular smoothness of a man who has already arranged for Mr. Calloway's review to produce a specific outcome. She closed the door. Gabriel had followed at a distance. She had seen him crossing the lane as she stepped outside, and she had not acknowledged him, and he had not called out to her. Now she turned, and he was there, 3 paces away, and she held the notice out without speaking. He took it and read the relevant clause, and she watched his jaw tighten. Not a dramatic reaction, not anger performed for her benefit, but the involuntary compression of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected and does not like being right about. He said nothing, but he folded the notice carefully and handed it back. That evening, walking back from the registry where Gabriel had gone to request the original filing date, and she had accompanied him because she knew the registry system and he did not, Honora asked the question she had been carrying since the market square. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "You have a barony. You have a trading fleet, if the card in your coat is accurate." You have every reason to be in London or Bristol or anywhere that is not a village solicitor's office in the middle of October." Gabriel walked 3 paces without answering. The lane was quiet, and the evening was coming down blue and cold around them. "My father died with debts that had accumulated over 20 years, he said finally. Not because he was a bad man. Because he was a man who understood medicine. He was a physician, as it happens, and understood nothing at all about the difference between a legitimate creditor and a man who constructs a debt in order to own something he cannot otherwise take." He paused. "I spent 8 years clearing those debts before I built anything of my own. I learned everything I know about commercial documents in the process of that work. And when I arrived in your village square and watched a man hold a piece of paper over your father's head in front of witnesses, I recognized the shape of it." Honora listened. She did not interrupt. "Everyone I have ever met," Gabriel said, and here his voice changed, not breaking, but shifting into a register that was quieter and less managed, "has valued me for the result of those 8 years. The fleet, the title, the banker's draft I can produce in a market square. No one has ever wanted the part that preceded it, the knowledge, the work, the ability to read a document and know when it has been tampered with." He stopped walking for a moment, then resumed. "Your father said I lack heart. He may be right about a great many things. But that particular judgment was not entirely fair." Honora stopped walking. She stood in the lane with the evening settling around her, looking at the side of his face, and she understood something she had not understood before about why the refusal in the market square had landed the way it had. Not as a polite declination, but as a wound, delivered precisely because it had found something true. She resumed walking beside him, and she did not speak for the rest of the lane, and that silence was a different quality from the ones that had preceded it. Not the charged wariness of the market square, nor the careful distance she had kept since, but something that had gone still in the way deep water goes still, holding more beneath it than the surface showed. The agents arrived on a Tuesday evening, which was the kind of timing that suggested Pruitt had chosen it deliberately. 2 men with a catalog sheet and a manner of professional detachment, standing in the consulting room doorway while Dr. Fairweather was still at his desk and Honora was in the back room preparing the evening's records. She came out and saw them and understood immediately what they were there for. "The 3-week notice has not expired," she said. "Mr. Pruitt has authorized a preliminary inventory," the taller of the 2 men said. He had the decency to look mildly uncomfortable about it. "He has not the right to a preliminary inventory under the original terms," Honora said. "I will ask you to wait outside while I consult the document." She was in the act of turning back toward the records when she heard the sound from her father's study. Not a crash, not a dramatic signal of any kind, but a quiet, heavy settling, like a book falling from a shelf, followed by silence. She was through the study door in 4 steps. Her father was on the floor beside his desk. He had not fallen dramatically. He had simply gone down in the way that a man goes down when he has been holding something up for too long, and the strength for it finally fails. Slowly, without theatrics, his back against the desk leg and his chin dropped to his chest and his hands open in his lap. "Father." She was beside him, her hands on his face, checking his pulse at his throat. It was steady. He was breathing. His eyes were closed and his color was poor, and he was asleep or very close to it. The deep, unconscious sleep of complete exhaustion. She sent for Mrs. Aldridge next door. She went back to the waiting room doorway and told the 2 agents, in a voice that left no room for discussion, that the consulting room was closed for the evening, and they were to return to Mr. Pruitt and inform him that any further attempt to enter the premises without proper legal process would be contested before the magistrate. They went. She did not know until she turned back into the hall that Gabriel was there. He had come with a document from the registry. She found this out later. He had arrived at the front step just as the agents were leaving, and he had simply not left. He said nothing when she came back into the hall. He looked at her face, and then looked at the consulting room, and then went to the front desk and sat down. The patients came. Because patients always come. Because illness does not observe household crises. Gabriel received them. He asked their names in his quiet, direct way, and he asked what had brought them. And he wrote it all down in her ledger system with the same careful attention he brought to account books. The entries in a clear hand, the information accurately recorded, the appointments noted for the morning. Honora moved between her father's room and the hall through the long hours of the night. And each time she came out, she found the waiting room managed and the kettle kept hot, and Gabriel at the front desk with the same steady presence, doing the work without commentary. Near dawn, when the last patient had gone, and Mrs. Aldridge was sitting with her father, and the gray light was beginning to come through the front window at a low, tentative angle. Honora came out into the waiting room and sat down in the chair beside Gabriel's. She did not speak. She had been speaking and managing and holding things in place for 8 hours, and there was nothing left in her for words. She sat down, and the exhaustion of the night came fully upon her at once, and she rested her head against his shoulder. Gabriel did not move. He did not speak. He did not make any adjustment or gesture that would have turned the moment into something it needed to be named. He simply remained, solid and still. And Honora sat with her head against his shoulder and watched the gray light strengthen in the window. And neither of them moved until the morning came fully in. And Mrs. Aldridge's voice sounded from the back room, and the day began again. In the days that followed, Honora was courteous. She answered Gabriel's questions about the mortgage documents promptly and accurately. She thanked him for the night at the front desk with genuine warmth. When he arrived at the consulting room, she met him with the pleasant, composed manner of a woman who has everything well in hand and requires nothing further. She did not seek him out. She declined once when he offered to walk with her to the market, citing an errand she needed to do alone. She answered his questions briefly and did not ask any of her own. She told herself it was about appearances, about the village's perception of the Fairweather household's dependence on a wealthy stranger. This was a real concern. It was not the real reason. The real reason was that she had leaned against his shoulder in the gray dawn and had not wanted to move, and that wanting had frightened her in a way that Pruitt's notice and the forged clause and the agents on the doorstep had not. Those were external threats. She knew how to meet external threats, with paperwork, with composure, with the precise application of whatever knowledge she possessed. What she did not know how to meet was the particular quality of safety she had felt in that hour before dawn. Sitting beside a man who had stayed when he had no obligation to stay and had asked nothing for it, and the way that safety had felt, for one unguarded moment, like something she could not afford to need. Her mother had needed. Her mother had needed the security of a marriage to a man of means, and the man of means had understood that need and had used it, systematically and without apology, for 23 years. Honora had been 12 years old when she understood what that looked like from the inside of a household. And she had made herself a private promise that she kept so quietly and so completely that she had almost stopped knowing she was keeping it. Gabriel felt the withdrawal arrive the way weather arrives. Not as a single event, but as a change in the quality of the air. He recognized it. He had seen it before, in the moment when a person who has been evaluating him decides that what they have found is sufficient cause for reassessment. He had spent his adult life watching people recalculate. He retreated into the manner he used with business acquaintances, entirely correct, efficiently warm, and closed in a way that was worse than coldness because it could not be objected to. The account books sat on the parlor table between their two chairs, unfinished. Neither of them suggested resuming the work. The letter from London arrived on a Wednesday, and Gabriel read it twice at his inn table before he put it down. His contact in the city, a man who had worked for 15 years as an ink analyst and document examiner for the courts of Chancery, had completed his assessment of the photographic copies Gabriel had sent. The accelerated repayment clause in the Fairweather mortgage had been inserted into the document after the original signing. The ink composition was different from the surrounding text, a later formulation, not available before 1847, while the mortgage had been signed in 1843. The handwriting of the clause, while superficially similar to the notary's established style, did not match the notary's confirmed signature samples in 7 specific letter forms. And there was a record, found in the registry's access log, of Elias Pruitt having requested access to the original Fairweather filing in the spring of 1851. 3 years after the mortgage was signed, and 3 years before the accelerated clause had any practical utility, Gabriel sat with the document for a long time. He knew what the information meant. He knew what it would do to Pruitt's claim before a magistrate. He also knew that he had spent the last 2 weeks arriving at Honora Fairweather's door with solutions, and that she had been right, in her way, to find this a particular shape of difficulty. Not because the solutions were wrong, but because of the manner in which they arrived. Unbidden and fully formed, carrying the implicit weight of a man who is accustomed to having his help received. He did not go to the consulting room. He wrote out the full summary of the examiner's findings in a clean hand, placed it in a folder, and waited. Honora came to the inn the following morning. He heard her footstep on the stair. She had a particular way of climbing stairs, quick and even, without the slight hesitation at each step that most people have. And he had just enough time to stand before she appeared in the doorway. She was wearing her gray wool dress, the one she wore for the consulting room, and her hair was pinned back with the plain efficiency of a woman who has not spent time on it. And she stood in the doorway, with her hands at her sides, and looked at him directly. "I have been cold," she said. "Not because I thought less of you. I want to be clear about that." Gabriel waited. "I was afraid," she said. "Not of you, specifically. Of what it felt like to need someone to stay, and to have them stay, and to want them to keep staying." She paused. "My mother spent her life in a marriage she could not leave because she had allowed herself to need it. I made a decision about that when I was 12 years old, and I have kept it very carefully ever since. And then you sat at the front desk all night and wrote the patients' names in my ledger system and made tea, and I did not know what to do with that." She stopped. She had said more than she intended. He could see that. Not from embarrassment, but from the slight surprise on her own face. The expression of a person who has heard their own thoughts spoken aloud for the first time and is assessing whether they are accurate. "Have you found anything?" she asked. Gabriel put the folder on the table between them. They read it together, standing side by side, the document flat on the table and their elbows nearly touching. Honora read without speaking. She read the examiner's findings on the ink composition. She read the letter form analysis. She read the registry access record, Pruitt's name, the date, the filing number. And she went very still for a moment, the way a person goes still when a thing they suspected but could not prove becomes, in a single sentence, proven. He saved Pruitt's life, she said. My father. 12 years ago, when Pruitt came down with a fever that took 3 men in the lower village. My father sat with him for 4 nights. He never sent a bill. He said the man had nothing to pay with, and he would not add debt to suffering. She looked at the registry access record. And Pruitt has spent 12 years building a way to take the consulting room. Gabriel said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the document had not already said. Will this hold before a magistrate? Honora asked. Yes, Gabriel said. The examiner's credentials are unimpeachable, and his signed statement is admissible. Pruitt's solicitor will object on procedural grounds. He will be overruled. Honora closed the folder. She turned to look at him, and the quality of her attention was different from every previous time she had looked at him. Not the evaluating wariness of the market square, not the careful courtesy of the withdrawal, but something direct and undefended that made the room feel smaller. Thank you, she said, for waiting. She meant the folder. She also meant something else, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it. And Gabriel found that he did not need it named. The hearing before the county magistrate was held on the 14th of November, in a room that smelled of wood polish and old paper and the particular cold of a stone building that has been heated inadequately for decades. Honora sat beside her father in the front row of chairs. Gabriel sat at the respondents' table with the London Examiner's signed statement and the comparative ink analysis arranged before him in the precise order in which he intended to present them. Pruitt's solicitor was a man named Garvey, competent and confident and accustomed to proceedings in which the opposing party had less preparation than he did. He made his opening statement with the smooth efficiency of a man reading from a document he has already won. Gabriel presented the ink analysis first. He did not present it dramatically. He placed the examiner's statement before the magistrate and explained, in clear and specific terms, what the difference in ink composition meant for the document's integrity. He used the word inserted once, deliberately, and let it sit in the room. Garvey objected on the grounds that the examiner had not appeared in person. Gabriel had anticipated this. He produced a sworn affidavit from the examiner's chambers, signed before a justice of the peace in London, and the magistrate admitted it. Garvey objected a second time on the grounds that the registry access record did not constitute evidence of intent. Gabriel had anticipated this as well. He produced the registry's own internal log, obtained through a formal records request, which showed not only Pruitt's access to the Fairweather filing, but a request made on the same day to view the original notary's signature samples. A request that had no legitimate purpose for a man who was simply reviewing a mortgage he held. The magistrate studied the log for a full minute. The room waited. The objection is overruled, the magistrate said. When the ruling came, the accelerated clause void, the original mortgage terms restored. The matter of Pruitt's conduct referred to the county solicitor general for further review. The room exhaled in a collective release of held breath. Dr. Fairweather sat very straight in his chair and pressed his hands together in his lap, and Honora put her hand over his and kept it there. Gabriel rose. Your Honor, he said, with the court's permission, I have one further matter. The magistrate nodded. Gabriel produced a second document, a deed transfer, prepared by his own London solicitor and notarized the previous week. He had told no one. He had not told Honora. He had not told Dr. Fairweather. He had written it out in the quiet of his inn room on the evening after he and Honora had read the examiner's findings together. And he had sat with it for a long time before he signed it. I am transferring, before this court and these witnesses, the deed to the property at number 14 Ashwick Lane. currently held in my name, adjacent to the Fairweather consulting room. To Dr. Edmund Fairweather. He placed the deed on the magistrate's table. The transfer is without condition, without encumbrance, and without debt of any kind. There is no obligation attached to it and no expectation of return. The room was completely silent. Honora stood. She did not turn to Gabriel. She turned to face the assembled room, the magistrate, Pruitt's solicitor, the village witnesses who had come to observe, the faces she had known all her life. And she spoke in a clear, steady voice. "I want this court and this village to understand something," she said. "I refused Gabriel Sterling in the market square 3 weeks ago. My father refused him. And I want it known that we did not refuse him because of his fortune." She paused. "I refused what I believed he was doing with it, arriving with a banker's draft and a solution and no knowledge of us, as though a debt could be settled and a person's dignity settled with it." She looked at the deed on the magistrate's table. "I was wrong about the man. I was not wrong about the money. Money offered without understanding is still a transaction, whatever the intent. But a man who spends 3 weeks learning the difference between a legitimate debt and a constructed one, who sits at a front desk through the night and writes patients' names in a ledger he was never asked to touch, who waits." Her voice did not break, but it altered, in the way a voice alters when it is carrying more weight than it was designed for. Who waits when he does not have to, and asks nothing for the waiting. That man is not offering a fortune. He is offering something else entirely, and I was too afraid to receive it. She sat down. Pruitt, who had been sitting in the far corner throughout all of this, with the expression of a man who has watched a well-constructed plan dismantle itself piece by piece, said nothing. There was nothing left for him to say. The garden behind the hearing room was small and autumnal. A few late roses gone to hips, a stone bench, the pale afternoon light coming through the last leaves at a low angle. Honora had walked out there because she needed air and space in a moment in which no one was looking at her. And she had nearly reached the gate when she heard his footstep on the gravel behind her. Gabriel stopped close enough that she had to turn and look up at him. He did not speak immediately. He stood in the pale garden light with his coat open and his hands at his sides. And he looked at her the way he had looked at things throughout the past 3 weeks, with the full, unhurried attention of a man who is not calculating an outcome, but simply seeing what is there. "I would like," he said, "to stop being careful around you." Honora looked at him. She thought about the market square, and the coat in the rain, and the hands on the ledger's spine, and the dawn light in the waiting room, and the weight of his shoulder under her head, and the folder on the table, and the word waiting spoken aloud in a courtroom full of witnesses. "I would like that too," she said. He kissed her once, in the pale autumn garden, without preamble and without hesitation. Not a tentative beginning, but a full and unhurried certainty. The kiss of a man who has stopped calculating the odds and is acting on what he knows. Honora's hand came up to his lapel without her deciding to move it there. And she held the fabric of his coat, and the last of the rose leaves moved in the cold air around them. And from inside the hearing room came the distant sound of voices and the scrape of chairs being moved. And none of it mattered at all. 1 year later, the parlor table was still there. It was the same table where they had first spread the account books together on a gray afternoon, their hands reaching for the same pages, neither of them yet willing to name what was happening between them. The table was still in the same place by the window. But the window now looked out on a garden that had been properly tended through the spring and summer. The consulting room at number 14 Ashwick Lane, having been absorbed into the Fairweather household not as a property transfer, but as the natural expansion of a practice that had grown considerably in the past 12 months. Now that the weight of Pruitt's constructed debt had been lifted from it entirely. The account books were on the table. They were closed and pushed to one side. Honora and Gabriel sat close together on the settle beside the fire, the winter evening pressing in at the window and the firelight doing what firelight does in a room where two people have stopped pretending to be somewhere else. His hand was over hers on the settle's arm, not the brief accidental contact of that first afternoon, but the settled, unhurried contact of two people who have stopped treating touch as something that requires justification. She was in the middle of a sentence. Something about the new drainage arrangement for the lane, which was a matter of genuine practical importance and which she had opinions about, when the knock came at the front door. She did not move immediately. She finished the sentence she was saying, unhurried, her voice carrying the particular ease of a woman who has stopped bracing for the next difficulty and has discovered that the present moment is sufficient. Then she turned to look at the door, and then at Gabriel, and the look between them contained something that had no name in any document she had ever read. Not a transaction, not an obligation, not a debt of any kind. Gabriel rose and went to the door, and the firelight moved across the room in the draft. And the voices from the doorway were warm and ordinary, and Honora remained on the settle with her hand where his had been, and listened to the familiar sound of the consulting room receiving whoever needed it. The door closed softly on whatever came next,